Well, let's turn to those dramatic events in Iran now. Protesters have fought running battles with police in the capital, Tehran, as demonstrations over the death of a young woman in police custody continue for a seventh day. Internet access has been severely restricted in a bid to stop the unrest from spreading. In a rare interview with foreign media, the woman's father has contradicted the authorities' version of events about how she died. Raha Rahimpour from the BBC's Persian service now reports.
Women across Iran are setting their hijabs on fire. They are tired of being beaten up by the morality police for not observing strict Islamic dress code. Their anger was sparked by the death of this woman, Mahsa Amini. She was just 22. She was arrested by the morality police in Tehran earlier this month. They said she wasn't wearing the mandatory hijab properly. They say she died of a heart condition, but eyewitnesses say she was beaten up in the police van. Her father told me she was a healthy young woman with no medical condition.
I still cannot believe she's dead. I don't want to believe she's not alive. Iranian state media are saying she had health conditions before. But that's a lie. The medical report was full of lies.
The government has cut the internet in much of the country, so it's hard to get accurate information at the moment. But last time they did this 3 years ago, they killed hundreds of people. With thousands of people protesting across the country, there are fears that far more might be killed this time. Protests are quickly spreading across the country, and they are no longer just about clothing. It's about regime change. Now, men next to women are standing together, chanting death to the dictator. But for Iran, change comes slowly. The Iranian president, who's at the UN, insists that hijab is a personal choice. But even in New York, he demanded that the world-renowned broadcaster Christiane Amanpour wears a headscarf for an interview. This was refused. But the same refusal in Iran is costing lives. Rana Rahimpour, BBC News.
Well, in response to the death of Mahsa Amini and the crackdown on the protests that followed, the US has imposed sanctions on Iran's morality police. Joining me now to talk about all of this is BBC Persian's correspondent here in New York, Bahman Kalbasi. Welcome to the programme, Bahman, here at the United Nations. Now, this was President Raisi's first visit to the UN, but has his handling of the protests and of the death of Mahsa Amini just underlined his reputation as a hardliner?
He didn't have much of a reputation before he arrived. He's the president with least votes when he got elected in the history of presidents in Iran, and he's tied, known very well even externally, to mass execution in the late 80s. So on top of that, this event of the arrest of Mahsa and her death sort of crystallized the deep, long-running discrimination, repression of women in Iran, and the reaction to it all happens while he was here. So the juxtaposition of him standing at the United Nations, talking about justice and against use of force in the international arena and human rights, while forces of his regime started using extreme violence against protesters, became very difficult, a very hard sell, basically, for him to make any case. Even on his first day, he had a meeting with President Macron of France, and I caught up with the president right down here, and he said he raised the issue of protests and women in Iran. So he encountered the fact that this issue overshadowed any attempt he was trying to make to present a case here at the UN.
And I know that clip of you interviewing President Macron, it got 7.7 million views on Instagram. Then the Iranian authorities have cracked down on the internet, so it disappeared. What is different about these protests? There have been protests before in Iran.
There has been, and women were involved in it, but they've never led protests the way they have led these. And they have now challenged one of the most important pillars of the Islamic regime, which is to force women to wear a hijab, to cover their hair. In previous protests, every time, even if they were about democracy, people were saying to women, join us about democracy, but let's leave your demands of more personal freedoms to the side for a later time. Now it has taken center stage. It is the reason they're out in the streets and men are out there supporting them. And also, the most fearless protests I've ever seen in my entire life. They are confronting the police. They are standing there and basically shaking the fundamentals of this regime's pillars, which is, again, the Islamic code of dress for women.
Bahman Kalbasi, thank you so much for that analysis there. Now, the shocking murder of a young woman in South Korea last week has led to widespread anger there after it highlighted the country's weak laws on stalking.